Captain Sarah Chen stood at rigid attention before the United Earth Council, her dress uniform crisp despite the sweat beading at her temples. Through the chamber's towering windows, the gleaming spires of New Geneva stretched toward the evening sky, their surfaces reflecting the golden sunset. The room's silence felt heavier than any gravity she'd encountered during her decade of space service. Captain Chen, Council President Torres began, her voice echoing in the marble chamber. You understand the gravity of what we're asking. Sarah's jaw tightened. Yes, Madam President. I'm to serve as Earth's military liaison to the Lyran hegemony. The words tasted metallic in her mouth, like the aftermath of combat stems. More than that, Torres corrected, leaning forward. You're to be humanity's representative in the most crucial diplomatic mission in our history. The Lyran's technology could advance us by centuries. Their medical knowledge alone could save millions, Sarah finished. I've read the briefings. She'd done more than read them. She'd memorized every detail about the Lyrans since their ships had appeared in orbit 3 months ago. Tall, graceful humanoids with iridescent skin and eyes that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. Their civilization had mastered faster than light travel when humans were still fighting with muskets. The chamber doors whispered open, admitting Ambassador Valen, the Lyran diplomatic attaché. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral as the alien glided toward them. Even after months of contact, the sight of a Lyran still triggered something primal in her hindbrain, a warning that something wasn't quite right about their too-perfect symmetry. Time grows short, Valen announced, his voice carrying the musical undertones characteristic of his species. The High Council awaits. Torres rose, smoothing her formal robes. Captain Chen has been fully briefed on the proposal. She understands what's at stake. What was at stake was humanity's future. The Lyrans hadn't come bearing gifts of technology and medical advances out of altruism. They needed something only humans could provide: genetic diversity. Their civilization was dying, centuries of careful breeding programs having created a population too perfect, too uniform to adapt to new challenges. Human DNA, with its chaotic, messy resilience, might be their salvation. Sarah followed Valen from the chamber, her boots clicking against marble floors. The Lyran transport waited on the landing pad, its organic curves a stark contrast to the angular human architecture surrounding it. As they approached, Sarah caught her reflection in its pearlescent hull. Dark eyes set in an Asian face that had seen too many battles, black hair regulation short, shoulders straight with practiced military bearing. You fear us, Valen said as the transport's door spiraled open. It wasn't a question. I respect your capabilities, Sarah replied diplomatically. The Lyran's laugh was like wind chimes in a storm. Your species clings to such careful words, yet your bodies betray you. Your pulse elevates in our presence. Your pupils dilate. Your skin releases stress hormones. Sarah strapped herself into one of the transport's acceleration couches. Then why choose us? Surely there are other species more compatible. None with your potential. Valen's fingers danced across the controls, and the transport lifted silently into the darkening sky. Your kind survived nuclear war, climate collapse, and first contact with 3 hostile species. You adapt, you evolve, you thrive where others would perish. The transport breached atmosphere, and Sarah watched her homeworld shrink beneath them. The Lyran flagship waited in high orbit, a cathedral of living metal and crystalline spires that dwarfed humanity's largest vessels. The High Council remains unconvinced, Valen continued. They see your wars, your violence, your primitive emotions. They fear introducing such chaos into our carefully ordered society. Then why am I here? Because some of us believe that chaos is exactly what we need. The transport glided into one of the flagship's docking bays. You have 1 standard month to prove humanity's worth to the Council. Fail, and our peoples go their separate ways. Succeed. He turned those unsettling eyes on her. Succeed, and both our species might survive the coming storm. Sarah unstrapped and rose, her military training taking over as she followed Valen through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own life. What storm? The one that follows evolution's wake, Captain. The one that comes for species too rigid to bend, too proud to change. He paused before a massive door adorned with swirling patterns of light. The High Council awaits. Are you prepared to speak for your entire species? Sarah squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on her. She wasn't a diplomat or a politician. She was a soldier, trained to fight battles with weapons and tactics, not words and customs. But maybe that's exactly why she'd been chosen. The Lyrans had plenty of experience with smooth-talking ambassadors. Perhaps it was time they met a human who spoke with actions instead of rhetoric. "I'm ready," she said, and stepped forward to face humanity's future. The doors parted like petals of a massive flower, revealing a chamber that seemed to stretch into infinity. Hundreds of Lyran faces turned toward her, their iridescent skin catching the light like oil on water. At the chamber's center, elevated on a platform of pure energy, sat the High Council, 7 figures whose presence made Valen seem crude by comparison. Sarah felt their collective gaze like a physical weight, testing, measuring, judging. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity that no amount of diplomatic niceties would sway these beings. They needed to see humanity's worth demonstrated, not discussed. Her first step into that chamber would either begin humanity's greatest journey or mark the end of their brief contact with the star's eldest children. Sarah Chen, daughter of Earth, took that step without hesitation. The true test was about to begin. The combat arena aboard the Lyran flagship defied human engineering principles. Its walls shifted like liquid mercury, forming and reforming into different terrains while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Sarah stood at its center, her standard-issue combat suit feeling suddenly primitive amid such advanced technology. High Counselor Zareth's voice reverberated through the chamber. If humans wish to join the hegemony, they must prove their worth through more than words. The trial of adaptation begins now. Sarah had expected negotiations, diplomatic banquets, careful discussions about genetic compatibility. Instead, within 12 hours of her arrival, she'd been directed to the arena. The High Council's message was clear: prove humanity's worth through action. The mercury-like walls solidified into a jagged landscape of crystalline formations. Across the arena, a door materialized, and through it stepped Commander Krefel, the Lyran military's most decorated warrior. His combat suit made hers look like primitive armor, its surface rippling with adaptive camouflage and energy shields. "This is not personal, human," Krevel's voice carried across the arena. "But your species represents chaos, unpredictability. We cannot risk our genetic purity on savages." Sarah unholstered her sidearm, loaded with training rounds, and checked her suit's systems. "Funny thing about chaos," she replied. "It has a way of surviving when order crumbles." The arena's atmospheric controls activated, filling the space with a thin, acidic mist. Sarah's suit immediately registered the change, its filters struggling to compensate. She could hear the Lyran observers murmuring above. They were testing not just her combat prowess, but her ability to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. Krefel moved like liquid light, his form blurring as he closed the distance. Sarah had studied Lyran combat techniques, but recordings didn't do justice to their speed and grace. His first strike nearly took her head off, energy crackling where her last stuck-in dodge took her clear. But Sarah hadn't survived 3 alien conflicts by fighting fair. As Krevel's momentum carried him past, she dropped and rolled, scooping up a handful of the crystalline fragments that littered the ground. Her suit's sensors confirmed what she'd suspected. The crystals interfered with energy signatures. "Impressive reflexes," Krevel acknowledged, circling her. "But reflexes alone will not." Sarah threw the crystal fragments, not at him, but at the arena's environmental controls. The crystals shattered, their fragments disrupting the carefully maintained atmospheric conditions. The acidic mist began to swirl erratically, creating pockets of clear air. "Chaos," she said, using the disruption to change positions, isn't the opposite of order. It's the mother of adaptation. Above them, several council members leaned forward, their interest visibly piqued. Sarah didn't wait for their reaction. She fired 3 quick shots, not at Creevil directly, but at the crystals near his feet. The fragmentation created a cloud of reflective particles, confusing his suit's targeting systems. Creevil's response was immediate and brutal. He charged through the cloud, his energy shield flaring as it deflected the crystal shards. But Sarah had anticipated this. It was the textbook Lyran response to visual interference. She was already moving, using her smaller size and lower center of gravity to slide under his guard. The impact when they collided sent shockwaves through the arena. Sarah's combat suit screamed warnings as its joints absorbed stress they were never designed to handle. But she held on, using Creevil's own momentum to throw him off balance. "You fight without honor," he growled, regaining his footing. Sarah circled him, breathing hard. "I fight to win. Honor means nothing if you're too dead to learn from defeat." The acidic mist was growing thicker, more corrosive. Sarah's suit integrity was down to 60%, its filters clogging. But she noticed something else. Creevil's perfect movements were becoming less fluid. His advanced suit, designed for peak efficiency, was struggling to adapt to the chaotic environmental conditions she created. "Your technology is impressive," she said, ducking another strike. "But sometimes the simpler solution is more robust. Like now, your suit's trying to adapt to 15 different environmental factors. Mine just has to keep me alive." Understanding flickered in Creevil's eyes a moment too late. Sarah had been herding him toward a particularly dense cluster of crystals. When he stepped back to avoid her next attack, his foot caught on the uneven surface. It was a tiny mistake, one a less advanced suit might have compensated for with basic stabilizers. But his suit, attempting to optimize for multiple threats, overcorrected. Sarah struck then, a combination of moves learned in Earth's gravity, refined in zeroed combat, and adapted for this very moment. Her first hit overloaded a section of his shield. The second found a joint weakness. The third sent him sprawling. Before he could recover, Sarah had her training weapon pressed against his helmet seal. "In nature," she said, loud enough for the council to hear, "the most successful species aren't always the strongest or most advanced. They're the ones that can adapt." For a long moment, silence filled the arena. Then Creevil did something that shocked the observers. He laughed. "Perhaps," he said as she helped him up, "there is wisdom in chaos after all." High Counselor Zaraeth's voice cut through the dissipating mist. "The trial is concluded. Captain Chen, you have demonstrated unexpected qualities, but this was merely the first test. The true challenges ahead will require more than combat prowess." Sarah nodded, her suit wheezing as its overtaxed systems tried to compensate for the damage. "With respect, High Counselor, everything I did in this arena was to avoid winning through combat alone. I used your own environment against you, adapted to changing conditions, and found solutions you didn't expect. Isn't that exactly what you need from us?" The crystalline walls began to dissolve, returning the arena to its neutral state. But Sarah had seen something in the council's reaction, a crack in their certainty, a glimmer of recognition that perhaps humanity's chaotic nature wasn't a weakness to be feared, but a strength to be embraced. As she followed Creevil from the arena, she caught fragments of discussion among the observers. Words like potential and adaptation filtered through her suit's damaged audio pickups. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a start. What none of them knew was that this trial had been the easy part, the real test of humanity's worth, and Sarah's ability to prove it was still to come. The alert sirens aboard the Lyran flagship sang with an almost beautiful resonance, but their meaning was universal: danger. Sarah was halfway through her post-trial medical examination when the first impacts rattled the ship's crystalline structure. Void swarm signatures detected, the ship's living intelligence announced, its voice echoing through every corridor. multiple breach points, all warriors to defensive positions. The Lyran medical technician dropped her instruments, her iridescent skin paling to an almost translucent white. The Devourers. They weren't supposed to reach this sector for another cycle. Sarah was already moving, ignoring the protest of her muscles from the earlier trial. What are Void Swarm? What are we dealing with? Her answer came in the form of screams echoing down the corridor. The medical bay's doors shattered inward as something massive and dark pushed through, a writhing mass of chitinous armor and crystalline growths. Sarah's combat training categorized multiple threat points: razor-edged limbs, acidic secretions, and what appeared to be organic energy weapons fused to its carapace. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed the fallen medical instruments and hurled them at the creature's sensory clusters. The improvised weapons wouldn't do much damage, but they bought her enough time to reach the emergency weapons locker. The Lyran pistol she retrieved felt alien in her hands, its controls responding to thought as much as touch. "Get to the secure chambers," she ordered the medical technician. "Alert anyone you can on the way." The corridor outside was chaos. The Void Swarm had breached multiple decks, their biological technology somehow bypassing the flagship's legendary defenses. Sarah encountered Krevel leading a squad of warriors, their advanced armor scorched and damaged. "These creatures adapt almost as quickly as your combat style. Human," he said, firing a sustained burst at an advancing swarm entity. "Our weapons become less effective with each engagement." Sarah's mind raced, processing the tactical situation. The Void Swarm moved like a coordinated intelligence, each unit learning from the other's encounters. The Lyran's systematic, ordered response was becoming predictable to them. "You're fighting them wrong," she said, ducking under a spray of molecular acid. "They're counting on you to be logical, to follow optimal combat protocols. We need to be unpredictable." Krevel's squad had been pushed back to a junction of corridors. Above them, the ship's living walls were trying to seal the breaches, but the swarm entities had infected the repair processes. "The High Council chamber is 3 sections ahead," he reported. "We must reach them before." A massive explosion rocked the ship. Through a breach in the hull, Sarah caught a glimpse of space beyond. More Void Swarm vessels were emerging from what looked like tiers in reality itself, their organic hulls pulsing with malevolent purpose. "Give me tactical control of your squad," Sarah demanded. When Krevel hesitated, she added, "Your perfect order is what they're counting on. Sometimes you need chaos to fight chaos." A nearby blast knocked several warriors off their feet. Krevel made his decision. "Squad, follow the humans' commands." Sarah quickly assessed their resources. The Lyran weapons were incredibly advanced, but they were being used in predictable ways. "Your armor can interface with the ship's systems, yes. The walls, the environmental controls. Of course, but then do exactly what I say, exactly when I say it." Sarah's mind was already 3 moves ahead, seeing patterns in the swarm's behavior that the Lyran's rigid tactical thinking had missed. And Krevel, "Trust me that this is going to look completely insane." What followed was perhaps the most unorthodox battle ever fought aboard a Lyran vessel. Sarah had the warriors deliberately destabilize sections of the ship's environmental systems, creating zones of unpredictable gravity and atmosphere. The swarm entities, used to adapting to systematic responses, found themselves caught in chaos. "Now," Sarah shouted, leading a charge that no Lyran combat doctrine would ever have approved. They used their armor's interfaces to reshape corridors mid-battle, turning the ship's own fluid architecture into a weapon. Where the swarm expected organized resistance, they found controlled mayhem. "This is madness," one of the warriors commented as they fought their way toward the council chamber. "This is humanity," Krevel responded, beginning to understand. They turn uncertainty into advantage. They reached the council chamber to find it under direct assault. The High Council members were trapped behind failing shields as massive swarm entities tried to breach their defenses. Sarah noted with grim satisfaction that even now, The council was maintaining perfect formation, their responses measured and precise, and increasingly ineffective. "Break your formation," she shouted at them. Scattered targets are harder to predict. To her surprise, it was High Counselor Zara'eth who responded first, abandoning her position to move in a pattern that seemed random but was carefully calculated to disrupt the swarm's attack algorithms. The other council members followed suit, and suddenly the chamber was a whirlwind of movement and energy. Sarah coordinated with Creeville's squad, using their advanced technology in ways its creators had never intended. They turned energy shields into offensive weapons, used environmental controls to create devastating pressure differentials, and at one point even reversed a section of artificial gravity to turn a group of swarm entities against each other. Hours later, when the last of the Void Swarm had been driven off or destroyed, Sarah stood before the High Council again. The chamber bore scars of battle, its perfect symmetry broken, but there was something different in the way the council regarded her now. "You saved not only our lives," Zara'eth acknowledged, "but perhaps our understanding as well. We saw today what you tried to tell us, that chaos and order need not be enemies." Sarah, exhausted and injured but standing proud, met their gaze. The Void Swarm adapts to patterns, to predictability. Their evolution weaponized. To fight them, you need to be able to change, to think differently, to embrace uncertainty as a strength. "Perhaps," Creeville added, stepping forward, "this is why we were drawn to humanity. Not despite their chaos, but because of it. The Void Swarm is only the beginning. We need their adaptability, their unpredictability, their humanity." As the council chambers buzzed with discussion, Sarah knew they had passed a point of no return. The Lyrans had seen firsthand what humanity could offer, not just genetic diversity, but a whole new way of thinking, of fighting, of surviving. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time since her arrival, Sarah felt true hope for both their species. The Lyran archives were a vast repository of knowledge housed in living crystal matrices, their surfaces rippling with stored data that stretched back millennia. Sarah stood before a towering data node, her reflection fractured across its faceted surface as she studied the ancient texts scrolling past. "You should be resting," Creeville said, approaching silently. His armor still bore scars from the Void Swarm battle, worn now like badges of honor. "The healing chambers could repair your injuries." Sarah shook her head, not looking away from the display. "Your medical technology is impressive, but I need to understand something first." She gestured to the streams of data. "These are your earliest records of genetic manipulation, aren't they?" "The shaping of the lines," he confirmed. "When our ancestors first began to perfect our species." "Perfect," Sarah repeated, the word tasting bitter, or control. Before Creeville could respond, the archive chamber's entrance spiraled open to admit High Counselor Zara'eth. The elder Lyran's presence seemed diminished somehow, her usual ethereal grace marked by evidence of their recent battle. "The council remains in deadlock," Zara'eth announced without preamble. "Despite your actions during the attack, many still fear the implications of introducing human genetic material into our carefully maintained bloodlines." Sarah finally turned from the display. "With respect, High Counselor, I don't think your ancestors were trying to perfect your species. They were trying to protect it." Both Lyrans stiffened, but Sarah continued, pointing to specific data streams. "Look at these patterns. The initial genetic modifications weren't about enhancement. They were about survival. Your civilization was facing some kind of threat, wasn't it? Something that required rapid adaptation." Zara'eth moved closer to the display, her eyes narrowing. "The great diminishing. It is spoken of only in our oldest texts, a time when our species faced extinction from a rapidly changing environment." "So your ancestors modified your genetics to survive," Sarah pressed. "But they didn't stop there. They kept going, generation after generation, trying to maintain control over your evolution. And now we face extinction again," Creeville finished, understanding dawning in his eyes, not from environmental change, but from our own inability to adapt. The archive chamber hummed with tension as Sarah accessed another data stream. There's something else. These genetic markers you've been tracking, the ones showing your species' declining adaptability. They spike in the presence of void swarm activity. Zareth's skin paled. Impossible. The swarm was unknown to us until recently. Unknown or forgotten. Sarah brought up ancient star charts, overlaying them with current void swarm movement patterns. Your ancestors didn't just modify your genetics for survival. They were preparing for something. The swarm isn't a new threat. It's an old one returning. The chamber's crystalline walls seemed to pulse with the weight of this revelation. Sarah could almost feel the centuries of carefully maintained order beginning to crack. If what you say is true, Zareth said slowly, then our entire understanding of our history, our purpose. An alarm cut through the archive's reverent silence. Secondary void swarm signatures detected at the system's edge, larger than the first wave. We don't have time for debate, Sarah said, her voice hard with urgency. Your species modified itself to survive an ancient enemy, but you took it too far. You engineered out the very chaos that makes adaptation possible. Now that enemy is back, and your perfect order won't save you. Krevol's hand went to his weapon instinctively as the alarm continued to blare. The Council will never accept such a radical revision of our history. They don't have to accept it. They just have to survive it. Sarah accessed one final data stream, revealing a simulation of genetic compatibility between humans and Lyrans. Your scientists have already confirmed we're compatible, but they're thinking too small. We shouldn't be talking about careful, controlled genetic exchange over generations. We need to act now. What are you suggesting? Zareth asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. A full genetic merge. Not just a few carefully selected humans, but open exchange between our species. Immediate integration of human genetic diversity into your population. Sarah met their shocked expressions steadily. Your ancestors engineered out chaos to survive. Now you need to engineer it back in to survive something worse. The archive's displays flickered as another alert sounded. The void swarm was accelerating toward them, their numbers far greater than the first attack. It would break every tradition, every law of genetic purity we've maintained for millennia. Zareth whispered. Traditions that are leading you to extinction. Sarah countered. You've spent generations trying to maintain perfect order. But nature doesn't work that way. Evolution isn't about perfection. It's about adaptation, change, survival. Krevol stepped forward, his expression intense. The combat trials, the chaos you introduced during the swarm attack. You were showing us this all along. I was trying to. Sarah pulled up the genetic compatibility simulations again. Your technology is incredible. Combined with human adaptability, both our species could not just survive the swarm, but evolve beyond anything your ancestors imagined. The archive chamber trembled as distant defense systems activated. They were running out of time. The Council will resist. Zareth warned, but Sarah heard the change in her voice, the seed of possibility taking root. Then we make them understand the only choices are adaptation or extinction. Sarah straightened, feeling the weight of two species' futures pressing down on her. Your ancestors made a choice to survive, no matter the cost. Now it's your turn. As if in response to her words, the archive's displays shifted, showing the approaching void swarm fleet. Their organic ships looked like tears in space itself, harbingers of an extinction event that had been millennia in the making. The time for perfect order was over. The age of chaos, controlled, purposeful, evolutionary chaos, was about to begin. The Lyran flagship's command center hummed with an energy that was anything but orderly. Sarah stood at its heart, surrounded by holographic displays showing the approaching void swarm armada. Beside her, Krevol and a mixed crew of humans and Lyrans worked in carefully controlled chaos, their movements reflecting the unprecedented merger of their civilizations. The past 48 hours had been a blur of emergency protocols and rushed genetic procedures. After Sarah's discovery in the archives, a faction of the High Council, led by Zaravath, had made an unprecedented decision. The first wave of voluntary genetic mergers between humans and Lyrans had begun immediately, despite the protests of traditionalists. Swarm vessels accelerating, a Lyran operator announced, her skin showing traces of human pigmentation, one of the first visible signs of the merger. Their adaptation rate has increased by 40% since the last encounter. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting how the swarm's movements had evolved. They're learning from both of us now. They can sense the change in our people. Then perhaps we should show them just how much we've changed, Creevil said, his own appearance subtly altered by the genetic merger. The rigid perfection of his features had softened, while his tactical thinking had gained an edge of human unpredictability. Sarah nodded, activating the fleet-wide communication system. Around them, the combined human-Lyran defense fleet took position. The ships themselves were changing, their living metal hulls incorporating elements of human design that would have been heresy days ago. All vessels, execute Battle Plan Chaos Protocol, Sarah commanded. The name itself was a statement. No Lyran battle plan had ever embraced chaos before. Remember your training. Don't think like humans or Lyrans. Think like something new. The void swarm struck like a wave of living darkness, their organic weapons attempting to adapt to the Defenders' technology. But this time, they faced an enemy that defied prediction. The merged crews fought with Lyran precision, guided by human intuition, their ships moving in patterns that appeared random but contained deeper purpose. They're trying to isolate the flagship, Creevil observed as the battle unfolded. Just like they did in the ancient records, they seek to destroy command and control. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Then let's show them why that won't work anymore. She activated the experimental systems they'd developed in the precious hours before the swarm's arrival. All ships initiate genetic resonance fields. The technology was a fusion of Lyran biological science and human theoretical physics, something that could only have been conceived by minds that bridged both species. Energy fields rippled between the allied ships, creating a network that mimicked the swarm's own adaptive capabilities. Multiple swarm breaches detected, an operator reported. They're attempting to board. Let them, Sarah ordered, earning surprised looks. They're about to learn something about real adaptation. The boarding parties encountered defenders unlike anything in their ancient memory. The merged crews fought with impossible combinations of Lyran technology and human unpredictability. Where the swarm expected order, they found controlled chaos. Where they anticipated weakness, they found hybrid strength. In the command center, Sarah and Creevil coordinated the defense with a synchronization that transcended either of their original species. The genetic merger hadn't just combined their strengths, it had created something entirely new. Energy spike detected. A sensor operator called out. The swarm is attempting to replicate our genetic resonance field. Now, Sarah commanded. Across the battlefield, the merged crews activated the final phase of their plan. The genetic resonance field shifted, creating a cascade effect that the swarm's adaptive abilities couldn't match. They had evolved to counter either order or chaos, but not both simultaneously. They're breaking formation, Creevil reported, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Their adaptation algorithms are failing. Sarah watched as the void swarm vessels began to tear themselves apart, their own evolutionary drive turned against them by the impossible patterns of their new enemy. They can't adapt to what we've become because we haven't stopped becoming. Evolution isn't about reaching perfection. It's about never stopping. The battle raged for hours, but its outcome was decided in those first crucial moments. The swarm, for all its ancient terror, couldn't counter an enemy that combined Lyran technological mastery with humanity's embrace of chaos. In the aftermath, as the surviving swarm vessels retreated into the void between stars, Sarah stood before the combined High Council. The chamber, once a sanctuary of perfect order, now hummed with new energy. "We face a choice," Zara-Eth addressed the assembly, her appearance now a striking blend of both species. "We can cling to what we were, or embrace what we are becoming. The Void Swarm will return," Sarah added, her voice carrying the authority of victory. "But when they do, they won't find the same civilizations they sought to destroy. They'll find something new, something that never stops adapting." Creevil stepped forward. "Our ancestors engineered our genetics to survive extinction. Today, we honor their wisdom by taking the next step, not toward perfection, but toward endless possibility." The council chamber erupted in discussion, but Sarah noticed something remarkable. The traditional divisions between order and chaos, between human and Lyran, were already breaking down. In their place, something new was emerging, a civilization that understood that true strength lay not in perfection, but in the courage to change. As she watched the merged crews working together, their differences becoming strengths rather than barriers, Sarah remembered her first days aboard the Lyran flagship. She had come as humanity's representative, expecting to prove their worth through combat and diplomacy. Instead, she had helped forge something unprecedented, a future where the line between human and Lyran was becoming meaningless, replaced by a shared destiny of constant evolution and endless adaptation. The Void Swarm would return, yes, but they would find neither the ordered perfection of the Lyrans nor the controlled chaos of humanity waiting for them. They would find something new, something wonderful, something that was still becoming.